Well, welcome back, everyone. I'm honored to introduce our next session, this year's Pettit Scholar presentation, What to Do, What Do You Do with an Idea, presented by Jane Hartman. And so I'm going to give you a little background about Jane and then welcome her to give her presentation today. So Jane Hartman is a pediatric advanced practice nurse at the Cleveland Clinic Children's Hospital. She received her BSN from The Ohio State University and her MSN from the University of Akron. She has dedicated much of her 40-year career improving vascular access for children. Her research on the topic produced a nurse-directed algorithm whose goal is to pair a pediatric patient with a caregiver who can successfully and competently start an IV despite the child's IV access complexity. She received the 2021 Cleveland Clinic Innovations Medical Device Award for her innovative IV carriage system, which promotes patient mobility. Jane currently serves as Vice President for NEO-AVA and the team lead for the development of clinical practice guidelines for the PD NEO-SIG. It is more than an honor and a privilege to welcome her. So now let's hear Jane Hartman.
Well, good morning, everyone. So exciting for me to have the honor of presenting to all of you this morning. It's a little bit scary here. I'd rather be in person. I know I'm not going to time out or go away, but we're going to be discussing what do you do with an idea. Next slide, please. So I have a few disclosures. I do work at the Cleveland Clinic, and I am a speaker for Medline Industries, and I am not going to discuss any off-topic things. Next slide. So first of all and foremost, I want to give a heartfelt thanks to all my colleagues in the vascular access that I have learned from over these many years of coming to AVA. AVA has been a huge part of my life, and being selected as the Janet Pettit Scholar is really an honor of a lifetime for me as I end my career in nursing here probably next year. Well, you never really end it, but I'm hoping to retire after 42 years here. I do have many people I want to thank first. And first of all, my vascular access family. So that includes many pediatric and adult practitioners, but ones that really have had an impact on me are Darcy Dolman, Stephanie Pitts, and Nancy Moreau. I have gone to many of your sessions, learned many things from you, and really have the most high respect for all of that. Secondly, I want to thank my NEO-AVA family here in Cleveland. I've been on the NEO-AVA board for a while, and the chair is Andrea Miller. And that has been a great experience as well. I would suggest if you can get on a board and contribute in this specialty, it's really a great experience. As far as my Cleveland Clinic people, I really have to thank my mentor, Nancy Albert. If you were able to listen to our webinar last year, we both presented together on research. She has had a huge impact in my life, as well as Mary Beth Modick from the Cleveland Clinic. And then I'd be remiss if I did not mention my little mentee, Katie Freight, who's probably out there listening. She has really taken the reins of vascular access in the pediatric population, and she will certainly be up and coming as we move through our next few years here. So next slide, please. Initially, I wanted this to be more of a conversation instead of a lecture. Unfortunately, because of the virtual platform, this just makes me crazy because I really wanted to have questions like in real time. So please, if you have questions, write them down, put them in the chat room, and I am happy to answer all your questions. We're going to have a lot of content here today. And I know if I don't write something down as soon as I think about it, I can't remember it till I go to sleep at night and like, oh yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Next slide. So our learning objectives, which I forgot to put a slide in, is to recognize the importance and impact of innovation, to examine 2 current innovations created by myself, the presenter, a process, and a medical device, and discuss the importance of knowing if and how the innovation will work. So what is an innovation? And I'm going to read a few slides, but most of there's not going to be much reading at all. So innovation can be considered as being product or process that is new or is existing, but has been improved. There are different models regarding the process of innovation, and from these it can be identified that there is a strong link to creativity as part of the innovation process. This actually definition I got from this paper of S.P. Taylor, and they examined many definitions of innovation, and there's a lot out there. Next slide, please. So disruptive innovation is a theory that Clayton Christensen developed out of Harvard. And disruptive innovations are not breakthrough technologies that make good products better. Rather, they are innovations that make products and services more accessible and affordable, thereby making them available to a larger population. So I'm going to give you an example in my own life. My son is an engineer at Sikorsky Helicopter, and he works in the disruptive technology and innovation department. And they're working on, and this has been in the news as well, there's many companies working on trying to make helicopter transportation more accessible to common people, whereas maybe you would take it as, instead of commuting to work, you would be able to get on a 4-person helicopter and go from San Francisco to LA without being in traffic for 6 hours. So that's a disruptive innovation. Next slide. Other disruptive innovations you can see is Netflix. So we used to have to go to the movies and buy popcorn and drive there. And so Netflix brought movies to us. Same thing with the camera in the iPhone. I know many of you don't believe that their iPhones didn't exist, but iPhones and cameras used to be separate entities. So this just made it cheap, easy, and accessible to people to be able to take a picture and use their phone. And of course, minute clinics. So no one ever guessed probably 25 years ago that people would be going into drugstores and big box stores to see a provider and get a prescription at the same time without ever having to go to an actually identified medical facility. So those are all disruptive innovations. Next slide. So invention versus innovation. And so there's a couple discrepancies, and there's just so many different definitions out there. So I'm going to give you this one, and I would have added a new slide that I'm going to just read for you. So the main difference between invention and innovation is that invention involves creating something entirely new, whereas innovation involves improving an existing product or concept / product process. And we know that actually you can have a new innovation as well, according to Webster. So I'm just going to read this definition. The words innovation and invention overlap semantically, but are really quite distinct. Invention can refer to a type of musical composition, a falsehood, a discovery, or any product of the imagination. The sense of invention most likely to be confused with innovation is a device, a contrivance, or process originated after study and experiment, usually something which has not previously been in existence. So they're saying that an invention is new. Innovation, for its part, can refer to something new or to a change made to an existing product, idea, or field. So I'm going to say that an innovation and an invention can be new, but but different definitions. So I would have changed that slide if I had the opportunity. Next slide, please. So how do you know you're an innovator or an inventor? Well, next slide, please. So for me, it was on my name badge. So I presented at a conference, and when I went to pick up my name badge, it said innovator. And I'm like, doggone it, really? Now I'm an innovator. How, and this is so typical for me. I'll give you an example of that. I became a nurse practitioner after I had been a pediatric nurse for 25 years. And like it's such a weird kind of concept. So one day you're a nurse and the next day you're a nurse practitioner. It's like, well, what the heck happened? I went to bed and all of a sudden I wake up and I'm a nurse practitioner. So I got a call from a colleague, and they asked me a question. I said, well, why do you think I know that? And they said, well, you're the expert. And I'm like, doggone it, you're right. I'm the expert. And so sometimes it does take people to identify you without really realizing that you are these things. So, and then as I look back on my nurse to nurse practitioner experience, I realized, well, I had gone to school for 3 years. I did 640 hours of clinical practice. So it's not like I just became that. I became that over time, and then realized in a moment that that's what I was. Next slide, please. So the 4 Ps of innovation and invention from my standpoint, okay? So I don't think this is documented anywhere, but this was when I had a discussion with some of my innovation colleagues. This is what they said. So the 4 Ps of innovation, and I was going to do a little survey, but that is the symbol for passion. If you are not passionate about something, please don't even try to do anything with it. Don't try to innovate it. Don't try to invent it. Because if it takes, you got to have a thick skin to be able to get through a lot of these things. And when I talk about my experience, you'll understand that more. Next slide. I think I can, the little engine that could. So you have to be persistent. Again, if you can't hang on to it, or even have a glimmer of hope for something, you're not going to move forward. Next slide, please. Oh, this is my worst one. Patience. Take a deep breath. Oh my gosh. I am just not very patient. And I don't know if any of you know how the Cleveland Clinic time frame works, but they have their own clock. And it doesn't coincide with any other clocks that I've ever been involved in. So and especially for my in my invention process, and I thought it took a long time, but as I was discussing it with my innovation folks, they're like, this is going really quick. I'm like, oh my God, I can't even imagine what the real time is. Next slide, please. And finally, reach for the stars. So you have to have perseverance. So even if you're riding to the moon on a paper airplane, you have to have perseverance to be able to get through all the rigmarole and, just kind of stand your ground. Next slide, please. So the first topic we're going to talk about, I said we're going to talk about an innovation and then an invention. So the innovation here is my pediatric peripheral vascular access algorithm. And how that all started is when I became a clinical nurse, I didn't become a clinical nurse specialist. I work in the role of pediatric clinical nurse specialist. I am a peds nurse practitioner. When I took this job, our press gaining negative comments, tests, and treatments in 2013 produced this word cloud. And as you can see, IV was the most disappointing procedure to parents that we were doing in the children's hospital. So while I'm very good at vascular access, and I thought, man, I just fell into the lap of like using my skill set for this new job. My other initiative at that time was the pneumococcal vaccine, and I love vaccines. So I thought, my God, I just fell into the most perfect job. And actually, this is the most perfect job for me. I've really enjoyed this. But getting back to our word cloud. So if you've seen my research, I usually start my presentation with this. It's because this identified our problem. So while I was tasked to fixing this problem, and I'm like, well, there's only one of me, but I'll do the best I can. So I did tell the nurses to call me if they had an IV start, but I, of course, was not here every day on nights and weekends. And So while I fixed it a little bit, we really needed a new process, a new innovation. Next slide, please. So this vascular access initiation guidelines. So there were 7 steps here, and I'm just gonna, so the first one was to identify, you know, do you still need an IV? The necessity of the line. And it was a little bit wordy there. And then as you go through, you can see it was, assess all your vascular access sites, get your child life in, consider, besides child life, non-pharmacological, consider pharmacological products, and then look at the skill level of each provider and see if it matches the needs of the patient. And then if it could wait, or look at other means of maybe providing the treatment for the patient. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, my good friend John Baker, who is my assistant nursing director, when he saw that guideline, he said, "Jane, it's a little wordy." I'm like, "Well, geez, Louise, come on. What more do you want from me?" And then when he showed me, he goes, "Well, let's make it easier to read." I'm like, "Okay, so what do you have in mind?" And he came up with this algorithm. And I didn't even have Visio on my computer, so there was no way that I would even know what to do with it. So he put that together for me, and we used the stoplight method of green go, yellow caution, and red to stop. And one thing that we did on this algorithm that we didn't originally have were these stop signs. But it really makes sense because we are so task driven as a nursing profession, especially novice nurses. They have their list and they want to check it off and then they can go home for the end of the day. That we sometimes forget to stop. So our medical director at the time, she said, "Could you put a stop in there at the very end to, notify after 4 pokes the house officer on call?" I said, "Yeah, but do you want to do that?" And she said, "Absolutely." She said, "I was on call not too long ago and I was in house and a baby got poked 17 times and nobody called me." So we have to change our thought about vascular access from a task to a process. So this is the innovation for that process. I didn't invent how to start an IV, but I did innovate how we think about starting IVs, and in the adult population as well. We're working on that as well, but of course for my research and purpose for children. Next slide, please. So so I thought, well, this is going to solve the problem. No, we don't have to do anything else. We're going to post these posters on all the units. The nurses are going to follow them, and our problem will be solved. So my mentor, Nancy Albert, says, "Well, how do you know it's going to work?" I'm like, "Of course it's going to work. Why wouldn't it work? I mean, makes sense, right?" So we ended up doing a research study. And so this is one point I wanted to make about being the Janet Pettit Scholar. Her passion was research and disseminating it, from what I understand from colleagues I've spoke with about her. I did not personally get to know her, unfortunately, but I am honored to be presenting in her name. So how do you know it works? So my first project was the vascular access. So we knew what our first attempt success rate was, 52% before the algorithm. So we then collected data, we implemented the algorithm, did a rollout, had the nurses all come back on board to do our case report forms. And so we did, the research was pediatric vascular access peripheral IV algorithm success rate. And I thought, okay, well, this is going to be great. So what we found out from using the algorithm is that we did decrease the number of overall attempts and did decrease the number of staff attempting. unfortunately, we also decreased our overall success. So I said to Nancy, I said, oh my gosh, that's terrible. Now we're not even, starting as many as we did before. And she said, no, Jane, that's great. What that means is that we stopped the line. So we did not keep poking and poking and poking to get an IV at any cost. So that was a win. But we did not increase first attempt success, which is what our intent was. So I presented this at several conferences and did a poster. And so what do you do next? So next slide, please. So after I presented, now I have researcher on my name badge. I'm like, wow, this is like magic. You do something and the next thing you know, you get a new title. So now I'm an innovator and a researcher. Next slide, please. So what we thought was, what was the weakest link of our algorithm is that we were finding out that despite the algorithm, the problem with the algorithm is not that they didn't identify the nurses that could do it, is that we couldn't consistently have nurses or teams that were available as experts. So our critical transport team could have been out on a run. Our CRNA could have been in the OR. Our advanced practice nurses could have been busy in the PICU or the NICU with their babies. So we didn't have a consistent practice there. So what we were able to do then is, and this is at the same time that I was able to take Katie Freight to her first AVA conference in Nashville. And boy, that was a fantastic conference, not just the venue, but the conference was really good. And she came back and she was really charged. She's like, we are so far behind on what we're doing. And, she went to many presentations and really got really involved, very excited about pediatric vascular access. So because of that, and because of my research, next slide, please, we were able to get a pediatric vascular access team. Now, never in my life, honestly, I really never thought that we were going to be able to get a pediatric vascular access team because you were just always talking about money, 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 money. So, however, because of Katie and so my mentor, Nancy Albert, she always says, in God we trust, everybody else bring data. So that's exactly what we did. We brought the data. We said, we tried this process. We don't have the experts. And they gave us a vascular access team. And as you can see, our vascular access team was Molly, Katie, and Chris. Molly is still PRN, and then I have to thank Stephanie Pitts she actually came to the Cleveland Clinic and really helped guide us making a business plan, helping us see what the team could achieve. And unfortunately, she also stole my little Katie to Tampa. I'm just joking, Stephanie, but I do miss Katie. So I'm looking forward to seeing her next month when she comes back to Cleveland to visit. But this is what you can achieve when you have the data. You have to have numbers. Next slide, please. So again, how do you know it works? So we have the algorithm. Now we have the vascular access team. So did that make a difference? And I know people out there are going to say, well, of course it made a difference. You probably don't even need the algorithm. So again, this is why you need the research to prove that both those elements are very important in doing this. So the effect of adding a pediatric vascular access team component to a pediatric peripheral vascular access algorithm. And now, so we have our pre-data, which is before the algorithm, then we had our algorithm, and now we have our algorithm plus the vascular access team. And we were able to compare those three groups. So this time, though, we struck gold. So we further decreased the number of overall attempts. So when we first started, when we had our original data with no interventions, the number of overall attempts ranged from 1 to 10. And so we now went to like 1 to 2. Then we decreased the number of staff attempting. We had somewhere between 4 and 7 people attempting. We went down to 2 at the, on the average. We've also increased our overall success again, so that made me really happy. So we didn't really need to stop the line because the people that were starting the IVs were actually getting them on first or second attempt. And then the goal was we did increase our first attempt success. Now we did this research pretty shortly after we started the vascular access team, so we were up into the 75% range of first attempt success, but now of course we're much higher. And I'd like to collect data, but I don't know if I can get everyone to jump on board again. Next slide, please. So we are now added the vascular access team as the number one people to contact when you had a difficult IV. Next slide, please. But we wanted to have some discrete data in being able to identify difficult access, patients with difficult access. We couldn't just say, we needed something discrete. Next slide, please. So in 1999, Pat Catadell published this in the Journal of Vascular Access Devices, pediatric IV therapy. I can't read what those little words are, but basically what was in here is she developed from another tool, a tool for her institution to help decrease peripheral IV sticks, I believe in the NICU. I'm pretty sure she worked in the NICU. And because she did this and because she disseminated it, I was able to find it. It wasn't easy to find it, but I remember it was mentioned at one conference that this existed. And I'm like, well, where is this? Why, but it was never tested. There was never any research done on it. So Pat graciously allowed me to use this tool and to edit it and revise it for my needs and my research. So that's the importance of disseminating your work. Next slide, please. So now, while we were doing the previous research, we were scoring these patients, but we couldn't tell nurses which ones were easy, moderate, or hard because we didn't have the research. We didn't have any research on those numbers. So even though the nurses were scoring, we couldn't tell them what the cutoff was for an easy stick versus a medium stick versus a hard stick. I mean, we kind of knew that, of course, the higher the number was, the harder it was going to be to stick. But so how do you know that it's going to work? So next slide, please. So how do you know it works? So what we did is we took that data and we established a criterion and construct validity and reliability of the pediatric IV difficulty score. So what the results were is that this was new evidence that the 6-item PIDs that use 3 categories of IV difficulty was strongly associated with first attempt IV success and IV access success and number of staff attempting IV access success. Further, we did multivariate studies and we established that that the PIDs was not associated with PPVA with vascular access team support. So whether the team was there or not, the scoring of the patient remained reliable and valid. Next slide, please. So because of that, we were able to place this, we actually created an EPIC scoring tool of the pediatric IV difficulty score. And you can see that there's 6 lines, 6 items, but only 5 there because EPIC draws in the patient's age, and then you score those other 5 items, and you come up with a total score. So the total score is 6 to 10 is an easy access. So you would follow the algorithm, and for easy access, a novice nurse gets one poke. If she doesn't get it after that, then you have to escalate to someone that's more proficient. If they don't get it, they have to stop, reevaluate, then get someone that's an expert. If someone scores 7 to 10, we know that that patient is going to be a little bit more difficult to start. So a novice nurse would not get any attempts. A proficient nurse would get one attempt, and if she missed, she would have to escalate. And someone that scores 14 or higher, we know requires an expert in order to obtain first attempt success. The other thing about this, and I get this all the time, is that nurses, how are nurses going to learn how to start IVs? Well, first of all, we would like nurses to set them up for success and not set them up for failure. So we know that if a 2-year-old dehydrated patient comes in, someone that is not good at starting IVs is probably not going to get an IV on that patient first attempt. And we know that actually those kind of kids, 4 attempts to get IV access. So we also know that the younger the child, the harder it is to get access. So all those items really feed into the algorithm, and really, if it were my child, I would not want someone that is not proficient at IV starts to start an IV on my newborn baby who has only started one other IV. So let's take a look at, again, the process that is to set up a positive experience for both the nurse and for the patient. Next slide, please. So this I put in every one of my presentations. It's the decreasing, pokes for our kids. It really has been my passion for most of my career. I mean, really for all my career. But I love that this is still active, and I really encourage our pediatric practitioners to look at these, to create tools. I'm not saying my algorithm is the absolute best thing out there since sliced bread, but it's the only thing out there right now. So you know, research, research, research. If we're going to own the practice, we have to have evidence-based practice in order to move forward and to be reliable and to be able to disseminate. All those things are really important to grow our practice. So that is the last slide for the innovation. So my next topic, next slide, please, is another passion of mine, which is IV tubing laying on the ground. So I know all of you have seen IV tubing being dragged, rolled over, pinched, thrown over things, thrown under things. So here's a couple of my pictures, or my favorite ones. So the one on the left is a child that is outside during our farmers market. All those lines laying in the grass. Now, I think it's wonderful that they took this little baby outside to get some fresh air and all that, but the lines are like, I almost freaked out. So, and on the other side, you can see this little child walking down the hall. It took 3 people to give this little child some ambulation. And you can see all the lines. Some are thrown over the top. Some are wrapped around the PCNA's hands. And they're still kind of close to the ground, if you ask me. So the way I got involved with IV lines is I do a lot of observations for collapsy bundles when I was doing that before we had a vascular access team. I don't have to do that anymore. But one of the questions was, is the IV line off the floor? And invariably, it was not. A lot of times what I'd find is if we had intermittent infusions, that those lines would be either draped over or laying on the floor. Even though they were capped, they should not have been laying on the floor. A lot of kids walking back and forth to the bathroom, especially at night. We had one little boy who got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, stepped on his IV line, and literally ripped his PICC line right out of his arm. So this has been a problem that I thought somebody else would solve, but not seeing anything on the horizon. My mentor, again, she's Nancy. She said, well, why don't you invent something? And I'm like, why don't I? Next slide, please. So I looked in my desk drawer. She said, just put together a prototype, just put anything together and then we can work from that. So I looked in my desk drawer. Oh my God, and amongst the many things in there, pennies and forks and knives and lots of things. I found a piece of twill tape, a badge holder, and a stainless steel ring. I have no idea why a stainless steel ring was in my drawer. And the birth of the IV carriage system. That's how that came about. Next slide, please. So as you can see, I had to take a picture to put into my invention disclosure form for our innovations. So I mean, this is pretty rudimentary, but it worked. So, and then the picture on the right is the one my son did. He's a video guy, so much more professional. But this was my first prototype. Now, when so I submitted it to our innovations department. They did a prior art study. And one of the things that came up in prior art, so you're trying to have a patent, right? So that you create something unique and individual and other people aren't going to take it away from you. So their concern was the recoil on, and now I never intended for this to actually be the prototype, but they were like very focused on that. So I've learned a lot of lessons in this whole process. Now, this process started in 2016, so it's been 5 years. So just talk about patience. So their problem with the prior art was that the recoil on the badge holder was similar to the dog leases that recoil. So they were worried about, infringement on another patent. So they kind of nixed that, but my innovations person, Amanda, she's like, well, let's see if clinical engineering would have some ideas. So we met with them a couple of times. They brought out some pieces and parts, and we actually put another prototype together. I don't know where that is, but the reason why it's not around is because it broke right off the bat. Like, I think I played with it for 2 minutes and it broke. I'm like, well, that's not going to work. So then after that, they kind of said, well, we're not going to move further on this. It's very disappointing. And I was like, oh, all this time and energy. And really, my passion is what carried me forward, because every time I told a nurse about my idea, they said, that's a great idea. So I thought, well, 200 nurses can't be wrong. So innovations is not understanding what I want to say. Next slide, please. So here at the Cleveland Clinic, we're very fortunate that we have lecture series. And a good thing for me is that one of the lectures that we had, Tim Brown, he's the CEO of IDEO. It's a British innovation firm, and he has a design thinking process is his claim to fame. And what he told me, and I took notes on during this lecture, was that that buy-in is very important. That you don't sell the idea before you can make it. Find a way to prototype your idea, if only in a small way. And you have to make sure it works. Again, you have to, in order to move forward, you have to prove that it's worked. Why do all that work if it's not going to work? Just like the algorithm. So I was speaking with my son, Nathaniel, who actually knows how to do 3D printing. I said, Nathaniel, I need a 3D printed prototype. I said, that's the only way we're going to move forward with this thing. Oh, wait, I forgot one step too. So I was at an innovation dinner, because if you submit an idea, you get invited to the dinner, even if even if you don't have an invention yet. So I was sitting next to some innovation people, and one of the ladies' names was Sarah. And I said, Sarah, I'm so disappointed that they kind of just stopped. They just said, no, we can't move forward with the innovation. And when I said, when nurses really think it's a great idea, she said, Jane, it's just not ready yet. So I thought the door was shut, but the door was open just a crack. So then when I heard this speaker, I'm like, oh, this is the problem. I don't have a good prototype. And so I asked my son, Nathaniel, next slide, please, to 3D print me a prototype. So he said, well, Mom, what do you want? So I gave him some IV tubing. I gave him some little pieces and parts that I thought might work. And so this 3D printed prototype is in plastic. So that zigzag coil thing is supposed to be stretchy, because we know that the whole idea is that if the patient moves, we don't want them dislodging their vascular access device. Next slide, please. And that's just a demonstration of how that kind of would work back and forth. But that 3D printed prototype fits IV tubing perfectly. So next slide, please. So this is the money slide. So if you are speaking the same language as Innovations, then you're going to get their attention. So I showed Nancy this and showed Amanda from Innovations, and she said, I want you to resubmit your idea. So it was called the Highline Take Two. And now we're moving forward. Next slide. So because of that, they actually gave me a prototyping grant of $5,000 to be able to make a prototype again to see if it works. Next slide, please. So our biomedical engineering department put together these prototypes for me. Now they're exactly the same, they're just different colors, and just because that's the supplies they had. So with $5,000, I was able to get 25 of these prototypes. And the whole idea of having these prototypes then was they were going to be the intervention that we used in our IRB approved study in the Children's Hospital to test to see if nurses valued the innovation, and of course to see if it worked. So we had a tool that would evaluate whether nurses valued the innovation, and then we had 3 questions at the end. Does it keep the IV tubing off the floor? Was it easy to use? And did it increase patient mobility? Next slide, please. So then this happened, coronavirus. Now, most people in the whole world are not happy about coronavirus, and I'm not either, but it's because of this, next slide, please, that we started doing this, right? We started putting our IV pumps in the hall. Now, I know that that's controversial. I'm not going to go there with pumps and all that stuff. But we did what we had to do in order to take care of our patients and keep our nurses safe. So because our institution felt that that was best practice, excuse me, they started sending pictures out of our ICUs with all these lines, and it was unbelievable. So I ran upstairs to Nancy. I said, look at the pictures coming out of the ICUs. She took one look at those and she knew right away. She made one phone call to our executive chief nursing officer, Kelly Hancock, and said, I think that, we have a product here that we think will help. So one phone call, and the next day we are a go for prototyping in Innovations. As you can see on the right hand slide, I took all my prototypes that I had up to the ICUs so that they could at least use what I had. Now, when you have 6, 7 lines, you need 6 or 7 of the single cradle prototypes. So this was a great thing for me as well, that this happened, because the nurses are saying, we got to have more than one cradle. We need, and so next slide, please. So this created like a frenzy in nursing and in Innovations. And what you're seeing there is these are all 3D printed cradles. That was a collaboration between Case University and their ThinkBox and our Innovations. They were 3D printing these cradles 24/7, and then hand constructing these prototypes in order that we would be able to get our lines off the floor. We ended up making hundreds and hundreds of these, and I took them into the ICU, and literally the nurses gathered around me to get them so that they could use them on the patients because we had so many patients. So next slide, please. So as you can see here, we were using these prototypes. The room on the left, you can see the pool noodle on the floor that the nurses ingeniously come up with to try to get their lines not so strewn and to keep them from like laying on the floor. I mean, you know, as nurses, we're very ingenious. We just don't know it. And then you can see using the prototypes that were 3D printed again and handmade, we hung just the little hooks that come on and off the wall. And we were able to string like a telephone line from the bed to the wall to the outside the door to the pumps. So sometimes we were using more than one set of high lines. Next slide, please. And then once we got our prototypes, and those are the prototypes that you're seeing in use that we just were demonstrating how to use it. Same premise though, and I'm going to show you exactly what these look like. Next slide. So the IV carriage system, some of our obstacles were that many different rooms, many different hospitals, many different kinds of door openings. So one size did not fit all. So here on the left side at one of our enterprise hospitals, they strung all the high lines on an IV pole close to the patient just to establish them up and out of the bed. Then they ran those wires, those IV tubings outside the door with a hook with another high line and then to the pumps. Excuse me. And then on the right is just the same kind of, that's how they brought them out. Next slide, please. These are pictures of our NICU. So we had, at the beginning, we had NICU babies with COVID. And this, of course, was a baby with a central line. And they also used the high line for those babies as well, mostly for TPN. And again, nurse ingeniousness, they put little flags on that tubing because because of the isolate, it was kind of a weird situation. They still had it close to the ground, but at least was off the ground. Next slide, please. So the thing with the high line or the IV carriage system, the purpose initially was for it to be used for one patient because children are 2 feet tall and IV tubing is 6 feet long. But this all got morphed into something else. So being able to zip tie this to the IV pole is really helpful, especially for patients that only have 1 or 2 lines. And it can easily be removed. It can actually even be cut off if you need to. On your right is, oh, I know what that is. Okay, so that is one of our patients who's going in one of those wagons that actually gets attached to the IV pole. And her tubing was just almost underneath the wheel. So I stopped them. I happened to have eye lines in my pocket because I was having a photo shoot. And I put 2 of them on her IV pole in order to get them off the floor and into, away from the wheels. And the parents were very appreciative of that. Next slide, please. So the high line, excuse me, itch, is a 2-part system. It's a stem and cradles. The cradles are the original design that Nathaniel came up with that 3D CAD drawing. And the stem actually was helped develop by Proto Labs, who did all of our prototyping. As you can see, you can put up to 8 cradles on this. It gets a little heavy with 8. Again, this is still a prototype. It's not a final composition. It's what we've used up till this date. In our ICUs, we use 6,000 of these to get IV tubing off the floor. And we did send some out to hospitals that requested, knowing that it was a prototype and had not been tested. The the stem is very flexible, so it can give you some movement. And the cradles, the IV tubing actually moves through the cradle, so it can have some movement. Next slide, please. So this is just a really cool picture of the cradles. And they're color coded. I don't have any specific code for them, but I would think, so what I had in mind is that red would be like for an epi drip, and white would be for interlipids, and blue would be for antibiotics or whatever. So that's what I had in mind, but it doesn't matter. It's whatever your hospital establishes. The whole point of these colored cradles is because we were stringing these as telephone lines, basically. It was so that nurses could follow their lines, so they knew what was in each cradle. You also can write on these cradles. They're a polyether material, and they're a little flexible, so you can write on them if you would like. Next slide. So these are the little cones or knobs on the stem that keeps the cradles in place. And this concept came from my engineer from Innovations. His daughter had one of those necklaces, like the little pop bead necklaces. And so when we were explaining to Proto Labs what we wanted, he said, I have this necklace and this is kind of what I'm thinking about. And so that's what they came up with. So it takes a village. I did not think of all these things, but the original concept is my intellectual property. But now, of course, it's now the clinics, but it's not a bad thing. So next slide, please. So this is a beautiful slide that Nathaniel did of all the iterations of the IV care system. So my original, his 3D printing, the single one from biomedical engineering, the one that they 3D printed in Mass, and then the one from Proto Labs. Next slide, please. So patents and trademarks, we have 8 utility patents pending. We have a design patent pending, and the trademark, it's called the Highline. I named it. It was the thing I named since day one, and that has a trademark pending as well. So it's really, if you think it can't happen, it can. Nurses are always innovators. If you are doing something, a process, or have a product that you're always jerry-rigging, that I would say is like right up there with maybe having an innovation or disruptive technology. So, just because you keep doing it over and over again doesn't mean that you can't fix the problem. I was going to say something I forgot. Next slide, please. So how do you know it works? So how do I know that the Highline works? So we did a study at the clinic, of course. We actually did a multi-site study with our COVID ICUs. So we had a Florida location, we had main campus, and then we had a west and east and a southeast location. So 5 hospitals in this study. So that's always better when you can do a multi-site study. And it was the assessment of the value of the Highline and innovation to organize and elevate intravenous tubing during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we do have results, and we're just getting ready to submit for publication. But what I can tell you in general is that nurses highly valued it. We also studied pediatrics in the Children's Hospital and in pediatric outpatient infusion area. So, we also did some med-surg floors too. So we have different areas as well. So we compared ICUs to med-surg floors to pediatrics. And what we found actually is that the pediatric units really liked it the best. So, or valued it the best. But I don't have my data out here. I'm not going to give you any statistics. But again, if you create it, and you think it's going to work, you have to test it. So that's why our research, again, is so important. And we are submitting a manuscript to the American Journal of Nursing for this paper. And then, next slide. Now I'm an inventor. So now this one I actually didn't need to have on my name badge, but it did take me a long time to accept the fact that I had invented this. It's like so weird. It's like, oh, what I was rounding on a newborn baby at Fairview Hospital. I do that. I moonlight. And I went into the room and I was chatting with the mom. And I said, "Oh, where do you work?" I knew she was a nurse. She said, "Oh, I work in this certain unit," which I knew used the High Lines. I said, "Oh, then you use my invention." And she said, "What's your invention?" I said, the High Line. And she's like, "Oh my gosh," So it's just like, it makes it real when you can talk to people that are using it. One nurse on one of our colorectal surgery floors units, she said that she puts them in her pocket in the morning so that when she gets her patients up, that she puts them on there to guard their IV tubing. So it's come full circle. So it was meant for pediatric, single use, went to this COVID crazy crisis, pumps outside the hall, multi-cradle use. Now we're probably coming back to more single patient use, but on the colorectal floor, those patients have quite a few lines. And then recently, we went to our adult. I went and spoke at a shared governance meeting, and after I was just talking about the device, and one of the nurses that is the chair of shared governance for the adult BMT unit, she said, we'd like to trial it. We'd like to try it on our unit because our patients are, highly susceptible to CLABSI, and they need to get up and move around and exercise and that kind of thing. So they are using it, and I just followed up with her yesterday, and she said that it's going well. So multiple uses that you don't even think about. And next slide, please. So this cracks me up. So this is a picture of this is the Proto Labs 2021 Cool Parts calendar. And I'm a calendar girl. So I am Miss February. Not really, but this is so they did feature the High Line on their Cool Parts calendar for 2021. Also, I was the recipient of the Cleveland Clinic Innovations Medical Device of the Year Award. I also am was the recipient of the Nursing Innovation Inventory Award for 2021 for the High Line, and for 2020 for the algorithm. So I am just so honored. I have had such a wonderful nursing career. And I would just say out there, if you have an idea, just go with it. And, think about it. And I'm really happy to answer any questions that anyone has. Last slide. I do have one last slide. Next slide. Next slide. There you go.
What do we do with an idea, Junebug?
Change the world.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Jane, for a great presentation. That was excellent. And now this ends the CE portion of our session. Please sure to write down the CE code as you see it on your screen. It is 21330. Again, it's down at the very bottom, 21330. So Jane, let's get to our questions. So the first question we have is, what background experience, let's see, I'm trying to move the questions keep popping up, so I have to learn to move my screen a little bit. I'm working on it. People are chiming in.
Good,
What
I'm
background
glad.
experience do the nurses on your pediatric vascular access team have? And what are the requirements for nurses to apply to be a part of this team?
Okay, so when we started our team, none of our nurses had ever started a PICC line. So our requirement for the vascular access team is you have to be passionate about vascular access. I mean, most people that would apply for that team are really good at peripheral vascular access. And then we're willing to put in the time and the effort to teach someone that is a good candidate to be a vascular access team member. We actually just did this last year. One of our original members went to another institution, not as a vascular access team member. She went as an educator. And we hired a nurse actually from the institution where she went to, and she came on our team, and she had never started a PICC line. And so we really do work with our team. And honestly, we got our start from our adult PICC team. So the adult PICC team has a little different mission vision. Our adult PICC team only starts PICC lines, and they will do occasional peripheral access, but they start PICC lines. They start over 5,000 PICC lines a year in the Cleveland Clinic. Their expertise is that, so they really helped us develop that. But our pediatric vascular access team, our mission is to be the go-to for all vascular access in the Children's Hospital. So they round on all the central lines every day. They do assist with dressing changes, do dressing changes, are consulted about many areas related to vascular access. So a little different vision there.
The next question is, I love your EPIC documentation for difficult peripheral IV scoring. Did you have any problems with EPIC installation, and what is your rate of compliance in this documentation?
Yeah, that's a good one. So our Epic team created that. It didn't come from Epic. It's a specific application that we created. I have not checked compliance. I have seen it used. The issue with the inpatient ones is that our vascular access team does start a lot of our IVs. So they're not going to score because they're experts. So we know we don't need to call an expert. So it's kind of a moot point. But and this is a good point for doing research and creating things, is that you cannot force people to do something. You can show them why it's important. So every time I have an idea, I think, oh my gosh, why wouldn't you want to do it? But it's not that easy. I find that over time, people will accept it. So one example is our assistant nurse manager on on our IMC unit. She uses it faithfully. And when she teaches, when she's orienting nurses, she shows them how to use it. So, and different units will use it more because on our HEMONC units, all those kids mostly have central lines. But yeah, they certainly are aware of it. Sometimes everyone has a tendency to follow the path of least resistance. So they'll call the vascular access team without even scoring. And it's like, well, you got to score the patient. If they need the vascular access team, call them. If they don't, someone there has to have at least proficient expertise. So it's a daily struggle, I would say.
Great. So here's the next question. I may have missed this, but where did you go to see if there were already patents pending for your new device, or did Innovations help you through this process?
Oh, innovations, 100%. So they do what's called a prior art report, and anyone can look online. If you have an idea, you can go look online and see, who's got patents for that idea. But if you're going to do it, so that would be my first stop. If I went there and there was 50 of similar patents, then you can work off of you can do like a revised patent kind of thing, but it's very, very difficult. So that is really a hard process, and there's a lot of lawyers involved. So we have patent lawyers from both the clinic that examined this as well as the company that is going to commercialize it. But that's where I would start, would be the internet. And then if you have an innovation department, they will have a lawyer or some person that does all the prior art reports. My prior art report was like this thick, pages and pages of different similar things, but we're pretty happy with that.
The next question is, I'm sure the lines off the floor are very cost effective in terms of reducing CLABSI and dislodgements. Do you have any data yet on the cost savings for the hospital since the introduction of your prototype? And they want to know, how much does the cradle system cost per piece?
Okay, so the first one was, what was the first question?
Oh, that's okay. They feel that it's cost effective in terms of reducing
Okay,
CLABSI and
yes.
dislodgement. And do you have data that supports the cost savings since the introduction of your prototype?
So as far as cost savings, we did do a little analysis because we submitted for the magnet prize, but we did not get that, but unfortunately. But we had to do like just out of the blue. So what we did is we looked at the cost savings of nurses not having to go into the room when using the High Line out in the hallway. And between all of our hospitals and our health system doing that and decreasing the number of entries into the room and use of PPE, we figured that we saved the hospital system about $7 million. Wow. Yeah.
That's impressive,
And
Jan.
then what was the second question?
They would
CLABSIs
like
and
to
that kind of thing.
know, yep, well, and then they want to know how much your system costs per piece.
All right, so it's not commercialized yet. So right now it's nothing. But I mean, I have samples, but it will be commercialized, and then it's whatever they decide. It should not be that expensive. The idea is to make it, you know, of course, you know, you got to pay your people or whatever, but it's not anything technical. It's actually quite simple. So it's not going to cost $100. You know, I think even with prototyping, it was about. I'm just going to throw this out there. This stem and 5 cradles were about $6 to make them. You know, because when you're making in small quantity, it costs much more money. And then it also costs when you're cutting these molds. This is what I learned. So when you're doing injection mold injection, the more pieces that you can do, the less the product costs. So over time, it will cost much less.
Right. So did you have to start a company for production, or you were able to bring it to an independent company and they will produce the product? Or are
So
you
this is
going to
how it
sell it
works. Yeah.
independently?
So the Cleveland Clinic Innovations, when you agree to work with them, they actually take care of everything. You do get so you share in the whatever the profits are going to be. So what
The
happens is
royalty.
that the royalties. So the clinic
Mhm.
has an innovation department. They do not manufacture. So they've gotten us to the point where we are licensing the patent or licensing the know-how to a company that will actually produce it. It's coming. It'll probably come second quarter next year.
Good to know. Do you feel like you could branch out to other lines, and the examples were chest tubes or Foley tubing stabilization?
Absolutely. So I know that oxygen tubing fits in here very well, as well as, so in the COVID ICUs, they were actually putting CRRT tubing through it, enteral feeding tubing through it. We could probably use a microbore one that would hold microbore tubing for us. And we actually trialed this on same day surgery, and one of the evaluations was for a patient that had transureteral resection. They were doing that Foley where they had the double bag system to keep clots out of the bladder. And she used that to ambulate that patient because there were so many things. So yes, it's got it can hold cords. It's got multiple uses.
Does the data that you are going to publish include dislodgements and CLABSI reduction?
It does not. This is just a study on whether nurses valued the innovation and whether it did those three things of keeping the IV tubing off the floor, but that could be another study. Of course, you know, the thing with CLABSI is that it's so multifactorial. It's hard to just say, well, we used the high line, so our CLABSI rate went down. Very difficult. I can tell you that we've been using it in the Children's Hospital, and just recently we had some CLABSI, but we were CLABSI free until August this year.
And then this is off topic, but curiosity. As a pediatric nurse practitioner, did you have to go back to school or get another certification to become a clinical nurse specialist?
So I'm not a certified clinical nurse specialist, and yes, you would have to get a certification. The only thing is that there is only one test now for a clinical nurse specialist, and that is through, I think, ANCC for acute care, clinical nurse specialist, pediatric. There's very few pediatric clinical nurse specialists in the United States, and unfortunately, the specialty is declining every year. So I never say I'm a clinical nurse specialist. I work in that role because they could not find anyone. And as soon as I applied for it, it's like, well, you have the job because I have a lot of experience. So.
And then last question, what do you recommend for people who have ideas? Like who do they go to? Like if they're working in their hospital system and they have an idea, who do you recommend that they talk to first?
Okay, so first of all, what we know is that nurses have great ideas. And they know what problem it can fix, but the middle part where you have to get a prototype, test it, and actually make sure that concept is going to perform like you think it's going to perform. So we know even in our institution that's a problem. So if you have someone in your institution, we're so fortunate we have an innovation department and a nursing research department. So I worked tirelessly with Nancy because she's our assistant chief nursing officer for nursing research and innovation. So we worked together, and then she was the voice that got us into innovations, the big innovations. But now that we've opened that door, they are providing a $5,000 grant to nurses that come up with ideas that they think would be viable, that they'll help create a prototype for. So I would say if you have someone in your institution that is a research, I would get a mentor, of someone in your institution. And if you're in a big place, I'm sure you have an innovation department. You don't even know what's in there until you go there. I had no idea. Now I have names and numbers. So getting into that space is difficult, I will tell you.
Well, thank you, Jane, so much for your insight, your knowledge. We just so appreciate you, and congratulations again on your Pettit Scholar appointment. And so thank you, everyone, for joining us for this session. We now have a short break, and we'll meet you back here for our next session at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.